Well, joining me now to look at a very eventful week in federal politics are three MPs from the different parties. Marc Miller is a Liberal MP for the Montreal riding of Ville-Marie, le Sud-Ouest, Île-des-Sœurs. Michael Barrett is a Conservative MP for the Ontario riding of Leeds-Granville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes. And Rachel Blaney is the NDP member for the BC riding of North Island, Powell River. All three of you, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's start with the environmental bills. The government's environmental bills, one of them is moving through the Senate, Bill C-48, the tanker ban, and C-69, Marc Miller, has now come back to the House of Commons, and your environmental assessment legislation has 180 amendments to the legislation proposed. What's the government going to do with all those amendments? I mean, some of them are fairly big changes. Is the government going to pass the bill as is?
Well, we will take the time to look at the work that the Senate has done. We undertook to do so as a responsible government, so we'll take the time to give it the due review that we should give it. But at the same time, we know that these bills are part of a suite of environmental measures that are intended to move the country forward as a responsible government as regards the economy and the environment, and they are not the only measures by any stretch of the imaginations that we are trying to implement, Martin. But again, we need to take the time to review those and come back as a caucus, as a parliament, and vote on them accordingly. So this is a good sign. We did have some concern as to the way the Senate was behaving, particularly in a partisan Conservative caucus is behaving in a way that should leave nothing to the imagination, but we're glad at least one is back in our hands now.
C-48 is not back yet from Senate. There is a possibility there will be some amendments to it in third reading. Are you optimistic that you will get the tanker ban that you want back from the Senate?
Look, that tanker ban is essential both for the environment in that area, with the north tip of Vancouver Island and onward. But also for the Indigenous communities that need the protection in that area and have expressed as much. This is something that we undertook as a government, and it is part of a larger plan that this government has taken on responsibly and in order to protect the oceans around us, as well as reflect the community input that we have taken such care to put into the bill. So again, we'll look at it when it comes back, and we'll take the action that's required as a responsible government.
Okay, Michael Barrett, your reaction. First of all, to C-69, because it is now before the House of Commons, has been sent back to you by the Senate with 180 amendments. Most of these amendments were suggested or supported by industry and by a lot of voices in the West and your Conservative senators. Are you expectant that the bill, C-69, will pass with most of those amendments?
Well, I am not sure what to expect as far as whether or not it will be passed, but it's a terrible piece of legislation. The anti-pipeline bill, the tanker ban, throw in a carbon tax, and we have a Liberal government that is determined to undermine confidence in the Canadian energy sector at a time when the world needs more Canadian energy. And we have tremendous opportunities here in Canada to utilize and to export tremendously ethical oil, as well as oil that is sourced in an environmentally friendly way. And so the first thing that you can count on from a Conservative government is the repeal of the tanker ban, the repeal of the No More Pipelines bill.
Okay, but just to clarify though, B-69, just so I understand, most of these amendments are from Conservative senators, and they are saying they basically have fixed the bill. And I at one point heard Jason Kenney saying that he was finding a lot of those amendments interesting. So you're saying no, you would just scrap the whole thing?
Yeah, the 69 is terribly flawed, and it does not do what is necessary to get Canada's energy to market, and it leaves us dependent on oil from countries that have terrible human rights records and terrible environmental policies. And so 69 is even if the amendments passed, is not a bill that we would support in government, and what's further is we would scrap it.
Okay, Rachel Blaney, as you see these two bills making their way, one through the Senate and now before the House, and the other bill, the tanker ban, which I know is very important to people in British Columbia. Yeah. What do you make of their progress and the amendments to one of them and possible amendments to the other?
Well, we're definitely looking at the C-69 amendments right now. I know that in committee, our side put forward 100 amendments and really wanted to look at some of the core issues which we're finding across the board in terms of resource development in Canada, which is making sure that we look at the Indigenous part, make sure that we're working with those communities more effectively. Right now, we're seeing continuous, it doesn't even seem to matter what government it is, Conservative or Liberal. We're sending it back to the court system. It's not good for anyone. We need to get it right. So when you look at the environment, that has to be key in this. You know, we know that in Canada, we are not doing as well as we could. We are doing really high emissions in this country individually. Compared to the rest of the world, it's a little bit of a different picture, but there's so much opportunity for innovation. So we're going to look at this. We're going to be making sure to support amendments that really deal with Indigenous issues, make sure that we're looking at that relationship. You know, I think another thing that's important is it's also in the Senate where C-262 is getting held up, which looks at the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples and making sure legislation actually looks through that screen. And so until that work is done, we're not going to see anything happen and move forward. And, you know, I don't know how this government can currently sit there and say they're fighting for the environment at the same time that they're buying pipelines. So this is the discrepancy.
Are you optimistic, though, that C-48, the tanker ban, will pass the Senate? Are you optimistic that you'll see a tanker ban come out of the Senate?
We absolutely want to see a tanker ban. You know, we know in our community, the communities that I represent, we live on the ocean. A lot of our economy comes from it. This is sensitive ecosystems. We need to protect it and we need to get it right. So we're going to continue to advocate for that.
Okay, I want to turn to another issue which was huge this week, and that is we had developments on the China front, several different developments. First and foremost, we had the Prime Minister saying, Marc Miller, that he's hoping to have a head-to-head meeting, a one meeting with the Chinese Premier Xi at the upcoming G20 summit. We also, though, had the Chinese ramping up their threats to Canadian pork with increased inspections, and we had the news that there will be the court hearing for the extradition of Meng Wanzhou of Huawei is not even going to start until next January, while all of these Chinese pressures continue to mount. Marc Miller, what do you tell Canadians about what they're facing, what we're facing with this building crisis with China?
Well, Canadians should know that the safety and safe return of Mr. Spavor and Kovrig are of utmost importance to this government. We hope to meet and assert the diplomatic relations that we need to with China and ensure that those Canadians are in safety and are getting the proper consular relations and proper treatment that they are due and eventually released and sent back to Canada. This is something that is of utmost concern. We're very cognizant that China is an immense force on the trade front, on the diplomatic relations front, and is increasingly flexing its muscle across the world. Our allies are behind us. They also feel the consequences of Chinese action, whether it's diplomatic or trade related. So this isn't something that is unique to Canada. But what is exceedingly important for all Canadians is to know that our Prime Minister is using all the tools in the suite of tools that he has to make sure that Canadian national interests are put at the front burner.
What if one of those tools falls flat, though, and he doesn't get a meeting with Premier Xi? What I mentioned was this increasingly escalating trade measures as we await the extradition hearing for Meng Wanzhou.
Well, look, it takes two to dance. There's no question about that. But it's not like we're going to sit back and wait. As you know, Canada is very active on the diplomatic front. We have we don't hesitate to stand up for human rights across the world. You see the respect that we've garnered after 10 years of darkness under Stephen Harper, and I think people are very happy to see Canada back. But that doesn't mean that we will roll over, as we're often asked to do by the opposition. We will stand up for Canadians and ensure their safety, and also stand up for free trade with the nations that choose to trade with us.
Okay, Michael Barrett, what would the Conservative government do that isn't already being done or attempted by this current government faced with the Chinese pressures and the Chinese positions?
Well, you know, Mark said that they're using all the tools that are in the toolbox. There's a couple obvious ones that have been left in the box or forgotten about, and let's start with the fact that 6 months ago, Justin Trudeau's hand-picked ambassador, a former Liberal cabinet minister, had a very disgraceful end to his term as our ambassador to China. And since then, in the face of all of these real challenges that we're facing, including the unlawful detention of 2 Canadians and a host getting to be too many to count trade disputes on the agricultural front with China, we don't even have an ambassador. And we continue to call on the government not to roll over. Why not issue a WTO challenge? And Mark, I don't understand why the government refuses to do that. We know that the minister has spoken to the WTO. Why aren't we issuing that challenge? So these are some really basic steps, some first steps that we would expect a government to take. And that's how we know that they'd be serious. We can send delegations or have liberal junkets in China that achieve absolutely nothing, but they don't even take it seriously enough to appoint an ambassador. There's Canadian lives on the line. There's also Canadians' livelihood on the line. And while we also have trade missions going elsewhere, we still have no new markets for the products that China is shutting out.
Okay,
it's time for them to get to work.
Okay, Rachel Blaney, to you of her last word. I know where you come from is enormously dependent on trade with China. Mm-hmm. Your reaction?
Well, I think it's quite concerning. It's really becoming tit for tat, and I think Canada has to take some leadership here and really go to the core of diplomacy. I agree, there's no ambassador there. That's been since January. We're working on 6 months here. When these kind of issues are arising, when we have Canadians that are in harm's way, when we see our products not getting to that market, we need to see the action. And that diplomacy, that active action is not happening. And it can't be a back and forth, because this is too big of an issue to have it be that.
Okay. On that note, I want to thank all 3 of you. I want to wish you a happy and productive weekend. Thanks very much as we count down the weeks to the session. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.